What if the greatest battlefield genius who ever lived won every major battle he fought and still lost the war? In 216 BC, a Carthaginian general named Hannibal annihilated a Roman army so completely that even today, military academies from West Point to Sandhurst study it as the pinnacle of tactical perfection. Rome should have collapsed. Any other ancient state likely would have. Yet, 14 years later, on a dusty plain in North Africa, Rome stood victorious. This is the story of Cannae and Zama and how Rome learned its most enduring lesson. Survival often matters more than brilliance. Let's dive into this epic tale, exploring not just the battles, but the people, the societies, and the sheer willpower that shaped one of history's greatest comebacks. What does it take for a nation to rise from the brink of destruction? As we uncover this, you'll see how Rome's story still resonates in times of crisis. To truly grasp the Second Punic War, we have to step back and understand how two powers at its center, Rome and Carthage, and why their clash was inevitable. These aren't just two cities fighting over land, they were embodiments of different ways of building and maintaining influence in the ancient world. They were called the Punic Wars because the Romans referred to the Carthaginians as Punici, from the Latin word punicus, reflecting from their Phoenician origins. Since Carthage has been founded by Phoenician settlers, Rome labeled its wars with the city the Punic Wars. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had risen from a smaller settlement along the Tiber River into a republic, a system designed to prevent any one man from becoming a tyrant. Unlike the kings Rome had overthrown centuries earlier, power was deliberately divided. A senate made up of experienced leaders from Rome's noble families guided policy, laws, and strategy in war. Executive authority rested not in one ruler but in two consuls, elected each year and expected to lead Rome's armies in the field. This system encouraged debate and restrained ambition, but in times of crisis, it could also slow decision-making, especially when the consuls disagreed on how a war should be fought. Roman society was deeply layered. At the top stood the patricians, aristocratic families who dominated politics and public life. Beneath them were the plebeians, the common free citizens who could vote in assemblies and serve in Rome's armies. At the bottom of the rank were slaves and non-citizens, with few rights at all. What truly set Rome apart, however, was its powerful sense of civic duty, the belief that every free man owed service to the state, especially in moments of danger. Their shared obligation forged a resilient society, one willing to endure hardship and sacrifice for the survival of Rome itself. On the other side was Carthage, a city founded around 814 BC by Phoenician settlers from the eastern Mediterranean, known for their seafaring and trading skills. Located on the coast of North Africa in modern Tunisia, Carthage had built a prosperous empire based on commerce. Its wealth flowed from controlling key trade routes, exporting luxury goods like purple dye that was made from sea snails, glassware, and grain from fertile African farms. Unlike Rome's citizen-led government, Carthage was governed by a council of wealthy merchants and aristocrats, who focused on profit and expansion through alliances rather than a direct rule. Their military relied heavily on mercenaries, professional soldiers hired from regions like Spain, Gaul, modern France, and Numidia in North Africa. which made their armies diverse and skilled, but sometimes less reliable in long campaigns because these fighters were motivated by pay, not by patriotism. Tensions between Rome and Carthage had been building for decades before finally erupting into the First Punic War, a brutal 23-year struggle that ended just 2 decades before our story begins. The war was fought largely over Sicily and marked Rome's first major step beyond the Italian peninsula. Carthage, with its seasoned navy and warships designed for ramming and boarding, appeared untouchable, at least at sea. Rome started with no fleet at all, adapted quickly. They copied Carthaginian ships and introduced innovations like the corvus, a spike boarding bridge that turned naval battles into infantry engagements, where Roman discipline gave them the edge. After years of staggering losses and relentless perseverance, Rome emerged victorious. Carthage was forced to surrender Sicily and pay massive financial penalties, leaving the city humiliated, resentful, and financially crippled. This defeat fueled a desire for revenge. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, a brilliant general from the First War, moved his family to Spain to rebuild Carthage's strength through conquest and silver mines. It was in this environment that young Hannibal grew up, learning strategy and command. Historians like Polybius, a Greek writer who lived shortly after these events and interviewed survivors, and Livy, a Roman historian from the time of Emperor Augustus who drew on earlier records. They tell of Hamilcar making his son swear an oath to never be friends with Rome. Whether this was a literal event or a story added for dramatic effect, it captures the personal vendetta that drove Hannibal, turning the war into a family affair as much as a national one. By 218 BC, when Hannibal attacked a city allied with Rome in Spain, the Second Punic War began. It wasn't a simple border dispute, it was a struggle for control of the Mediterranean, pitting Rome's stubborn resolve and citizen armies against Carthage's clever trade networks and mercenary forces. As we delve deeper, consider this. In a war where one side seems unbeatable, what role does adaptability play in survival? Hannibal wasn't just a general. He was a visionary strategist, shaped by his father's campaigns and his own experience in Spain. He was born into the Barcid family, the powerful Carthaginian dynasty founded by his father. Hamilcar Barca, whose name meant thunderbolt, after Hamilcar's death and his brother's brief succession, Hannibal assumed command, quickly proving himself by expanding Carthaginian control across Iberia. That would be modern Spain. But from the beginning, his eyes were fixed on Rome. In the same year, 218 BC, Hannibal launched his audacious plan. Instead of sailing to Italy, where Rome's growing navy could intercept him, he marched overland through hostile territories, crossing the Pyrenees, and then the Alps, a feat that still astonishes historians. Imagine leading tens of thousands of soldiers, horsemen, and even elephants through snow-covered passes, battling not just enemies but blizzards, rockslides, and starvation. Many, of course, perished, but the survivors emerged in northern Italy like a thunderbolt, ready to strike at Rome's heart. Rome was caught off guard. Their strategy had assumed a war in Spain or Africa, not an invasion exactly in their homeland. Hannibal's early victories showcased his genius for deception and terrain use. At the Trebia River, he hid troops in the underbrush and lured the Romans across icy waters at dawn, where Exhaustion and cold made them vulnerable. The ambush turned the battle into a rout, showing Hannibal's ability to use weather and surprise as weapons. Then came Lake Trasimene, where Hannibal used the morning mist to conceal his army. He positioned his forces on high ground overlooking a narrow path by the lake, trapping the Roman consul and his men in a deadly funnel. The Romans, marching in column, had no room to form up, and the slaughter was swift and merciless. A testament to Hannibal's mastery of ambush. Cannae in 216 BC, just 2 short years later, was Hannibal's crowning achievement. After suffering earlier defeats, Rome assembled an enormous army under 2 consuls who alternated command, a system that reflected the Republic's democratic ideals, but also its potential for confusion and war. One consul favored caution, the other pressed for aggression. On the day the aggressive consul held command, Rome charged with full force, leaving no fallback. Hannibal, commanding a smaller army, set a trap that would become legendary. He arranged his infantry in a crescent formation, thin in the center, strong on the flanks, while his cavalry, including the nimble Numidian horsemen, famed for their hit-and-run attacks, waited patiently on the wings. The Romans advanced in their maniple formation, flexible groups designed for quick adjustments on rough terrain, but on this flat ground, they pressed tightly into the center. Hannibal's line bent without breaking, drawing the Romans forward like a net-snapping shot. Then the masterstroke. Hannibal's cavalry defeated the Roman horse on one flank, swung around to rout the other, and attacked from behind. The flanks closed in, encircling the Romans. What followed was hours of systematic killing. Men compressed so tightly they couldn't raise their swords. Polybius and Livy paint vivid pictures. The sun baked the field, dust choked the air, and the screams echoed as allies turned on Rome in the aftermath. Hannibal's victory was total, but it didn't press to Rome's gates, a decision debated for centuries. Perhaps he lacked siege equipment or expected capitulation. Instead, Rome's response would define the war. A key anecdote from Livy after Cannae, Hannibal's officer Marhabal urged attacking Rome, saying, "You know how to win a battle, but know how to use a victory." Hannibal hesitated, giving Rome breathing room. As historian Adrian Goldsworthy notes in his works on the Punic Wars, Cannae was the perfect battle, but it exposed Carthage's strategic limitations, reliance on one man versus Rome's collective strength. In the aftermath of Cannae, Rome teetered on the edge of collapse. Cities like Capua defected to Hannibal, seeking more favorable terms. Families mourned the dead, and the Senate gathered in urgent session. Yet, despite the shock, Rome did not crumble, a testament to the resilience of the Republic. They limited public mourning to just 30 days, keeping morale high and urging action over grief. Captured soldiers were left unransomed, a clear message to enemies and allies alike. Rome would show no weakness, and crucially, they appointed Fabius Maximus as dictator, a temporary leader granted absolute power for 6 months. A republican tool designed to confront emergencies without creating permanent tyranny. Fabius championed what became known as the Fabian strategy, avoiding big battles, instead harassing Hannibal's supply lines, scorching earth to deny forage, and wearing him down gradually. It was like a boxer dodging punches to tire out an opponent, rather than trading blows. Critics mocked Fabius as the delayer, but he worked, buying time for Rome to recover and prevent another Cannae-style disaster. Rome's secret weapon was its societal structure. Like Carthage's merchant elite who debated from safety, Rome's citizens were bound by the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, a code emphasizing duty, discipline, and perseverance that permeated all levels of society. They levied new armies from all classes, even arming former slaves with promises of freedom after service. Their Italian allies, those strained by the war stall, largely held loyal, bound by treaties that offered partial citizenship rights and protection in exchange for troops. The Carthaginian council, meanwhile, debated endlessly in their halls. They sent some aid, but not enough, fearing Hannibal's growing power might threaten their own authority at home. As Livy notes in his histories, while Hannibal was winning victories in the field, Carthage was losing the war through inaction and jealousy. Hannibal controlled southern Italy for years, winning smaller fights, but he couldn't force a decisive end. His army, far from home bases, suffered from disease, desertions, and constant supply shortages as Roman forces nipped at his heels. Rome's endurance turned the tide, proving that wars are won not just on battlefields with brilliant maneuvers, but in the quiet determination to outlast your enemy. Ask yourself, in modern terms, how many conflicts have been decided not by a single victory, but by who could endure the longest? In 211 BC, Rome recaptured the defected city of Capua, punishing it harshly to deter others and send a clear message. Betrayal would not be forgiven. Meanwhile, Hannibal still managed victories on the battlefield, such as at Herdonia in 210 BC, but his strategic momentum was slipping. But the turning point came with the Scipio. I will say Scipio in Italian because it is much cooler. A young noble who embodied Rome's ability to learn and adapt. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, born into the prestigious Cornelii family, and later given the title Africanus to honor his victory over Hannibal at Zama. His triumph was so celebrated that the Italian national anthem proclaims "L'Italia s'è desta, dell'elmo di Scipio s'è cinta la testa." Italy has awakened and has bound the helmet of Scipio over her head. Having lost his father and uncle in battles against Carthaginians in Spain, Scipio had personal stakes. He survived Cannae as a young officer, reportedly saving his father's life in an earlier clash, which built his reputation for bravery. Volunteering for command in Spain in 210 BC, a post others avoided as a death sentence, Scipio reorganized the legions. He introduced shorter Spanish swords for close combat and trained troops in more flexible formations, drawing lessons from Hannibal's own tactics without copying them blindly. At New Carthage in 209 BC, Scipio captured the enemy's main base in a daring surprise assault, using low tide to storm the walls. Victories at Baecula and Ilipa drove Carthage from Spain, cutting off Hannibal's potential reinforcements. In a tragic twist for Hannibal, his brother Hasdrubal tried to march an army over the Alps to join him, but was defeated at the Metaurus River in 207 BC. Hasdrubal's head was thrown into Hannibal's camp as a grim message. Elected consul in 205 at just 31, below the usual age, showing Rome's flexibility in crisis, Scipio argued for invading Africa, shifting the war's theater from defense to offense. "Why fight the branch when you can strike the root?" he asked the Senate, convincing skeptics by vowing to fund it privately if needed. Landing in 204 BC with a veteran army, Scipio forged an alliance with Massinissa, a Numidian prince exiled by Carthage after a power struggle. This gave Rome superior cavalry, fast, agile horsemen who could outmaneuver foes. Scipio's campaigns terrorized Carthage. He burned crops to starve them, defeated local forces in night raids, and showed mercy to captives to win hearts. The Carthaginian council in panic recalled Hannibal from Italy. After 16 years undefeated there, he returned home with his battle-hardened veterans but faced logistical issues. No elephants left from the Alps crossing, and his cavalry weakened. Scipio's approach was psychological too. He offered generous peace terms before Zama, forcing Carthage to choose between negotiation and risk. When talks broke over a minor incident, the stage was set for the final confrontation. As Goldsworthy observes, Scipio didn't just fight Hannibal, he outthought him by changing the rules of the game. Zama marked the war's climax, a confrontation of minds as much as arms. Scipio and Hannibal met beforehand, per ancient custom for honorable foes. Hannibal, now 45 and weary from years of campaigning, respected his younger opponent. Scipio, 34 and ascending, admired the legend who had haunted Rome. They discussed peace, but pride in politics prevailed. The battle would decide. On the field in October 202 BC, Scipio's army was disciplined and balanced, with strong Numidian cavalry from Massinissa. Hannibal had superior infantry but relied on 80 fresh captured elephants, massive animals trained to charge and disrupt lines, and weakened cavalry, as many as Numidians had defected. Scipio adapted the maniple system, Rome's flexible infantry units, by creating lanes between them, screened by light skirmishers armed with javelins. Hannibal fronted his elephants, hoping they would smash the Roman center, followed by 3 lines. Mercenaries up front for shock, then Carthaginian citizens, and his Italian veterans in reserve for the kill. The battle opened with the elephant charge. Scipio's men blew horns, shouted, and threw javelins to panic the beasts. Many veered into the lanes or turned back on Carthage's own lines, causing chaos and casualties among Hannibal's troops. As Polybius recounts, the elephants caused as much harm to their own side as to the enemy, highlighting how Scipio turned a feared weapon against its owners. The infantry line clashed fiercely. Hannibal's mercenaries, hired swords from various lands, fought hard but were pushed back by Roman legions. Scipion's men then reformed their lines to face the next wave of Carthaginian citizens who lacked the mercenaries' experience and faltered. Meanwhile, the cavalry decided the day. Massinissas Numidians, swift and relentless, routed Carthage's horsemen on one flank, chased them off the field, then returned to attack Hannibal's rear, echoing the encirclement tactic Hannibal himself had used at Cannae, but now turned against him. Hannibal's veteran corps held briefly, fighting with the desperation of men who had crossed continents for this moment. But surrounded on 3 sides, they broke. The defeat was total. Hannibal escaped with a few, but his army was shattered. He fled to Hadrumetum and advised his leaders to seek peace, recognizing the war's end. As Goldsworthy notes, Zama was the revenge of the Roman system, not one man's brilliance, but a collective will to adapt and endure. Cannae nearly ended Rome. Zama rewarded its perseverance. The peace treaty of 201 BC humbled Carthage. They lost Spain and other territories, paid a staggering indemnity over 50 years, surrendered their fleet, keeping only 10 warships for defense, and were forbidden to wage war without Roman permission. Carthage was reduced to a shadow, eventually destroyed in the Third Punic War decades later when Rome saw even that as a threat. Rome's gains were immense. New provinces like Hispania brought wealth from mines and farms. funding further expansions into the east. But the deeper lesson was in adaptation, from the Fabian strategy, patient attrition, to Scipio's innovative offensives. Rome learned to evolve, reforming recruitment to include more allies, improving logistics for long campaigns, and integrating lessons from defeats. So in the end, Rome survived and eventually thrived, not because it was perfect, but because it was resilient. Its political system and traditions were designed to endure crisis, recover from defeats, and adapt when needed. Even after disasters like civil wars or centuries later barbarian invasions, Rome could keep going while other states would have fallen. As the historian Goldworthy notes, Rome's victory was not inevitable. It was earned through a willingness to change, even when it meant bending traditions. Zama didn't just end a war, it set the stage for Rome's dominance, influencing law, engineering, and governance across Europe and beyond. Without it, the Mediterranean might have remained a Carthaginian lake, altering history's course. What if Hannibal had won at Zama? Carthage might have dominated the Mediterranean, controlling key trade routes from Africa to Spain. Rome could have indeed still remained a regional Italian power, perhaps fragmented by internal strife without the unifying threat of war. No vast Roman Empire spreading Latin language, roads, and aqueducts across Europe. The Romans' languages, French, Spanish, Italian, and others might never exist, and Western law and philosophy could have taken a different path, perhaps more influenced by Punic or Greek traditions. But history favored Rome's endurance, absorbing catastrophe, reforming, and prevailing. This road not taken reminds us of how single battles can pivot civilizations, a theme we'll see repeated in our series. Cannae is remembered for its tactical perfection, Zama for proving that true strength lies in recovery and change. Rome triumphed not because they had the best general, but because they refused to stay defeated, a lesson for any era. And of course, without this victory, Rome could have never expanded from Scotland to Iraq, a huge continent and huge expansion with the creation of the Roman Empire. There was an empire that lasted for hundreds of years. In our next episode, we have another shattering blow for Rome, this time one from which the Western Empire wouldn't fully recover. We're talking about Adrianople in 378 after Christ. So as you can see, the Roman Empire survived and lasted for over 500 years. And then after that, we'll see what will happen. We talk about barbarian invasions, and that will be very useful to remember for the next episodes, because we're going to Adrianople. So remember that. I will see you next time. Thank you for following up so far.